Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. Today's opinions will be about The Luminaries by Susan Dennard. Okay, so one of my least favorite things about fantasy as a genre is how many books just fail to disclose anywhere on the cover that they are part of a series. And the thing is, even if it is the first of a series, I just want to know before I get into it. And like, I promise you, I will still buy it. I will still read it. I just want to know if I'm getting into a series or a standalone. And in case you did not guess, from that introduction, The Luminaries is the first book in a series, specifically a YA fantasy series. It follows a teen girl named Winnie. She lives in a small town called Hemlock Falls, on the edge of a forest where a sleeping spirit rests. Across the world, there are 14 of these sleeping spirits, all guarded by a community of people called the Luminaries. They keep the spirits secret and support the members of their community who choose to be hunters. The men and women who go into the forest at least once a week to track down and kill the monsters that are spawned from the spirits' nightmares. Winnie wants nothing more in her life than to be a hunter. She has dreamed of it since she was a child. And even though this is an insanely dangerous, often deadly vocation, she's going to do what she has to become one. And it's going to be hard for her, because 4 years ago, it was discovered that her father was a spy for the Dianas, a group of witches who use the spirit's power for their own devices. They're traditional enemies of the Luminaries. When it's discovered, he flees, and the rest of the family left behind are named outcasts by the community as punishment. Now, Winnie hopes that if she passes her trial and finally becomes a hunter, her and her family will be invited back into the fold. But if she fails, there's a good chance she will not survive. Okay, so there's a lot more about this book that I enjoyed than I did not. One of my favorite things about it is this is pretty much exactly what I'm looking for in a young adult novel. It's very much an exploration of some of the emotions and struggles of being a teenager, and in this particular case, of being a teenage outcast. Winnie and her family are literally outcasted by the community, like they are being punished by the government and are named outcasts. And that means they are allowed to live and work in Hemlock Falls. Winnie goes to the same basic schools as the other teenagers. She's allowed basic, like, free-range travel around the community, but they are restricted to the worst-paying, most menial jobs in the community. Winnie's mom works as a low-paid waitress at the local diner and is not very well treated there. Her brother is the assistant of a member of the council, which honestly to me sounds like a pretty high-class job, but he's also treated like trash and is clearly not making a lot of money. And Winnie works with corpse duty. Now this is a job that all the teenagers in the town do, but she's been doing it significantly longer than most. And that job is just cleaning up the nightmares and the human remains that the nightmare leave in the forest throughout the week. But no one is allowed to be friendly with them. Winnie is made fun of at school, ignored by most of the adults around her. She's not allowed in any of the labs, libraries, or training facilities that are specific to the Luminaries. And even her aunt only speaks to her to give her the basic information she needs to do her job. And even though we are talking about an official, legal outcast, like a government punishment outcast situation here, a lot of what we see Winnie going through just feels a lot like what it's like to be the unpopular, poor, or friendless kid in a normal high school. Up to and including the fact that she literally cannot convince herself to trust the people who seem to be willing to be friends with her. There are two girls that are just openly friendly to her and keep making overtures of friendship towards her, and she just cannot convince herself to trust that they are being honest. And minor spoilers here. There is a point in this book where Winnie and her family do at least partially get invited back into the fold, and suddenly they're surrounded by people who are being super friendly to them and pretending like they've just been away for a while. And both Winnie and her mom have these really complex feelings of anger, joy, and distaste at how fake it all is. And I love the awareness of how much friendliness versus ostracization has nothing to do with who they are, what they've done, or if individuals like them, and everything to do with what the herd mentality is telling people they are supposed to do. And we get to see characters on a wide range of, like, possibilities of how they interact with this. Like, yes, there are some characters who do not care about the outcast order and are just kind to them. We also see characters who are friendly in private, but cold or downright mean in public. We see teens who take extreme joy in making fun of them as the other. We see adults who clearly are just ostracizing them because they are supposed to. And we see some that give the general vibes of that they're just doing this because it finally gave them permission to be as cruel as they would have otherwise wanted to be. And there's just a lot of interesting, honest, and nuanced examination of how people other members of their own community. Now, that being said, I do think we were told a little bit more than shown a lot of this stuff, especially in the early parts of the book. Like, Winnie thinks about how Marcus is only friendly to her in private, but we never actually see a scene of him being cold to her in front of other people. And for that matter, just, like, the majority of what we hear about and see about the ostracization in the first 50th pages is Winnie explaining what's going on. And is a bit of a problem, because objectively it gives me the idea, like, for the first 50 pages or so, I was really wondering if it was all in Winnie's head. If she was just one of those people who was like, oh, woe is me, everyone hates me, when truthfully a normal amount of people love her and hate her. But as the book progresses, it becomes clear that no, her family is being ostracized, this is not in her head, and a lot of the problem is it is very much the kind of ostracization that people experience in real life. Like, yeah, there are the people who are actively mean or making fun of them, but the bulk of it is just people not reaching out, people walking by them in the hallway, not responding to questions, not looking them in the eye, basically just not providing community. And that is something that is really hard to portray in one or two scenes. Like, it's not easy to present. You really need the gradual buildup of all those scenes where we see people not offering connection. But yeah, overall, I feel like this is a really interesting examination of what it looks like to be ostracized in a modern small town. But that is not all that was happening here. This is a YA fantasy novel, which means in the modern era, it must needs a romantic interest. Now, I will give the book credit that it didn't go full on YA tropes and give us a love triangle. And also, I like this romantic interest. Even though he is the cliche hot dude with deep dark secrets who shows up to protect the heroine because he's so attracted to her. He's also a lot more. Like, first of all, Winnie and him were friends when they were kids, and Winnie has these incredibly complex emotional responses to him because she remembers all those good times and has all that, like, attachment, but also she has a lot of emotional responses to how he reacted to her being named outcast. And there's a cheesy trope here that I absolutely love, where a character just doesn't notice how insanely attracted they are to someone even when they're being super thirsty. And yes, Winnie is constantly going like, oh my god, it's so weird, I wonder why everyone's so attracted to Jay. And then 2 pages later is being like, oh my god, I can't stop staring at his thighs through his pants. He's so muscular. And I'm like, girl. But I also think the author did a better job than most do of giving the characters excuses to touch each other. Because, like, that is something that is just common to romantic stories. There needs to be that moment where their hands accidentally brush and they get the flutters in the heart. And quite often it feels really forced and obvious, and like the author is clearly setting it up so we can get those emotions. And here there's just a lot more creativity to getting them to touch, and a lot more playfulness with it. And overall, that's one of the things I loved most about their relationship. It's playful. They seem to enjoy being in each other's presence, even while we got all the deep, dark, brooding shit. And also just, I really, really, really like the fact that even though, yeah, Jay is the cliche, silent, brooding, too cool for school stereotype, he's also the shy, awkward teenager that is much more realistic to the way kids actually act. Like, he doesn't hang out with everybody else, and everyone interprets this as him being too cool for them, but truthfully it's clear that he's just uncomfortable in the presence of a lot of people. And, like, he blushes, he says awkward things, he makes it explicitly clear that he is interested in Winnie, like he reaches out to her when nobody else is reaching out to her, and I just really love the fact that he's doing all this, showing all this interest, being a young teenage boy, while also being the deep, dark, brooding guy with, like, deep, dark secrets. And on that note, there's also a mystery in this book. Actually, there's 3 mysteries, but we'll get to that. But this one mystery, I was so sure from the moment I started reading the book that I knew what the twist was going to be. Like, spoilers here, but not really spoilers. It's mentioned very early on in the book, but there's a werewolf in this book, and one of the big mysteries is, who is the werewolf? Characters are constantly wondering, who is the werewolf? Though weirdly, Winnie never makes a prediction as to who the werewolf is going to be. But the reader does. It is so clear that the author is pointing us towards one character over and over and over again. Like, this guy's going to be the werewolf. He's going to be the werewolf. We're going to have him as the werewolf. And then, we're near the end of the book. We're in an action sequence. The werewolf is involved. And Winnie is thinking about something else entirely. She's remembering a previous scene that this character was involved in. And in that scene, she's thinking about him and going, well, it's not him. And she doesn't mean he's not the werewolf, but it is 100% clear to the reader that the author is saying he's not the werewolf. And I love it, because it was so clearly the author playing with our expectations, setting something up to pull the rug out from under us. And to make it even better, I recorded that short where I talked about it in very vague terms, and went to sit back down and read some more, and immediately had the thought of, wouldn't it be fucking hilarious if it turns out he is the werewolf? And we don't have an answer, but there is subtle implication that he might be the werewolf. And I just love it because it's so clear the author knows our expectations and is actively managing them. That being said, one of the big flaws in this book is also an expectation management thing, and that is the sequel issue. I had no clue going into this book that there was going to be a sequel. Like, I really thought it was going to be a standalone, or maybe a standalone with series potential where, you know, you get a book that you can read entirely by itself, but there might be a sequel coming out in a few weeks, and ooh, cool. But that's not what this is. This is one of those books, the first of a series, that feels like the author literally cut a bigger book in half. Like, there are 3 big mysteries plus a quest set up in this book, and only one of those things gets any resolution whatsoever by the end. Which is the sort of thing that I wouldn't have minded at all if I knew going into it that it was not a standalone book, that there was going to be a sequel. But as is, I was reading like 50 pages or like 70 pages from the end going, that's weird, like there's a lot still to be resolved, it's gonna have to be really closely interwoven to make this make sense. And then I was getting to like 50 pages from the end being like, the ending might be a little bit tight, this might be a little bit twisty. And then I was getting like 20 pages from the end and going, there's not gonna be resolution to this. And that's the moment I realized there was going to be a sequel. And I don't want it sprung on me like that. That's not good management of expectations. What I really wish this book had done was either say on the cover, the first of a series, or just change the weight of things. Because as is, the weight of resolution here is there a lot more unresolved than resolved. And if we had just put a little bit less emphasis on the plot threads that were not going to get resolution, it would have felt like a much, more solid book. And, I don't even mean, remove them or minimize them. I literally just mean, maybe mention them 1 or 2 less times. But I just needed some clue that they weren't going to get resolution in this book's climax. I did also want to say I found some of the character descriptions a bit much. Every single character in this book, secondary, tertiary, background characters, all of them are given at least one physical defined trait. And almost all of it was color related. Like, we're told their hair color, their skin color, and or their eye color. And that's fine sometimes. I want to know what characters look like. And to me, at least, hair color, skin color, and eye color is a lot more evocative than to say he had a broad chin or something like that. But it just starts to feel a bit redundant and almost a little bit pointed when it's all their hair color, eye color, and skin color. And also, because it gets a bit redundant, there are only a certain number of shades you can define someone's skin color. The author had to get a little bit creative and, use some more evocative terms that started to just feel like everyone was super pretty. But There's also occasionally what I call out-of-place bits of exposition. Like, the one I remember most clearly is we're almost halfway through the book. The world building is solid. We know what world we're in. And out of the blue, it's mentioned in passing. Of course, we know from back when the Dianas were part of the Luminaries, and I was like, what? I didn't know the Dianas used to be part of the Luminaries. Did I miss that? But because this feels like such an out-of-the-blue, very important bit of information, it seemed very clear to me that this was going to be a major part of the next big information reveal, or even a major part of the climax. And it's neither. It goes nowhere. It never comes up again in this book. Now, I'm assuming this is going to be an important element of the later books, but as is, it felt like an unfulfilled promise. And my only other real problem is the question of how the forests mesh with our world. Because, yeah, this is one of those books that is like our world plus magic. This is just some isolated town in the US in an era when people have computers and smartphones. And yet people are going missing in this forest on the regular? And, like, I get it that the people of Hemlock Falls are not exactly going to report it to the FBI when one of their family members goes missing, because they know what's going on and don't want to draw the attention of the outside world. But, like, the implication is at least some outsiders are disappearing in this forest on a regular basis. And I'm talking about, like, once or twice a week or month at least. And I'm sorry, but Mulder and Scully are going to be pounding on the door going, what the hell is happening? Why are so many people disappearing in this, like, tiny little town in the middle of nowhere? And if I did misunderstand, and these are all people of Hemlock Falls dying in the forest, like sometimes 2 to 3 times a week, like 2 people dying a week is 8 people a month, which is almost 100 a year. And if you add in all the people who are just dying of natural causes, dying of car accidents, dying of disease, or just moving away, it's going to be really hard to maintain what seems to be a very small town's population with that high of a death rate. And I know that's a stupid and pedantic thing to be worrying about, but it took me out of the narrative. I was thinking about it a lot more than I should have. But overall, I really enjoyed this book a lot more than I thought I would. Like, I tend to be a bit iffy on a lot of modern YA, and specifically because modern fantasy YA seems very stuck in some very specific tropes, which is why a lot of people treat YA as if it's a genre instead of what it actually is, which is a marketing target age group. But many of those tropes that it is really obsessed with are tropes that I'm just not fond of, and I knew this book was going to include a lot of those tropes. And yeah, it did. But I liked the way it utilized them. I liked the way it played with them. I liked the way it gave them nuance. I liked the way it inverted some of them. An example is Winnie. She is one of those characters that in a less talented author's hands would have very quickly turned into a not like other girls. Because she's smart, she's nerdy, she's capable, she's physically strong, she's trained in fighting and obstacle courses, she likes dark shit and doesn't have a lot of cool clothes, she doesn't wear makeup, she doesn't do her hair, and even one of her antagonists is that perfect, popular, pretty girl who with perfect hair and makeup at all times. But in this world, that does not make Winnie not like other girls, because all the teenagers, boys and girls, are expected to train on obstacle courses and in fighting. Like, even that popular, cool, pretty girl walks around in combat boots with steel toes. Winnie isn't wearing comfy, lazy clothes because she's too cool to care about what other people think of her appearance, but because she's busy, hasn't done laundry, and is too poor to afford anything better. When she does get a chance to dress up, she enjoys it. And most importantly, she doesn't look down on the girls that follow the more traditional girly girl, like, tropes. And overall, there's just not the tone that Winnie is somehow better than all the other girls for being less girly. And overall, I think this book does that a lot. Uses these very traditional, cliche even, fantasy tropes, especially YA fantasy tropes, but plays with them in a way that I barely notice that they are the traditional fantasy YA tropes. So overall, yeah, I think this is a really artfully done book. I just wish I had known before I went into it that I was going to need to read the sequel to get answers to the majority of the questions.